Hi everyone, we'll just give a couple minutes for everyone to join. We'll just give it another minute or so as people join, and then we'll kick off. All right, I'll get going now and people continue to join in. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar to discuss bioplastics and biopolymers for the Australian sugar industry. This webinar is being held as a part of a project managed at Queensland University of Technology with funding from Sugar Research Australia and co-supervision from Jane Trindle at SRA. So I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional country from the many places we're dialing in from today. At QT and in Brisbane, we acknowledge the Turrbal and the Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands of where the university now stands, and we pay respects to their elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. So thank you for joining us online today. I'll quickly make everyone aware that this webinar is being recorded and we'll make a recording available in the coming days. My name is Maddie Smith, and I'm leading a project at QT looking at how the sugar industry can benefit from diversified product streams within the bioeconomy space. So for those who don't know, my background is in synthetic biology, and I completed a master's degree funded by Sugar Research Australia. All right, so before we kick off, I'd like to invite Professor Ian O'Hara, the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at QUT and the Queensland Biofutures Industry Envoy, to introduce the theme of today's webinar.
Okay, thanks, Maddie. Good morning, everybody. I would also like to welcome everyone to this webinar in which we are going to explore the exciting field of bioproducts, which includes bioplastics and biopolymers, but also includes a range of other bioproducts like biochar and biogas. So bioproducts are simply products made from some component of biological or renewable materials, and it does encompass a broad range of products, which could include fuels, food, chemicals, and composite products. So if we look at something like bioplastics as an example, we talk about plastics derived from living organisms, such as plants or microbes, rather than from petroleum feedstocks. Examples of synthetic polymers include things like nylon and PVC. So biopolymers are simply polymers that have the same sorts of functionality, but come from renewable, sustainable materials, and typically use biological processes, but they might be used for things like packaging, textiles, and medical devices. So there's been some significant developments within Australia that are supporting the development of bioproduct markets. These include large-scale investment through programs like the Australian Research Council Industrial Transformation Training Centre for Bioplastics and Biocomposites, the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence in Synthetic Biology, investments in large-scale infrastructure, like the $16 million upgrade to the QUT Mackay pilot plant, and the Queensland Biofutures Industry 10-year roadmap and action plan, which aligns with Queensland's new industry development strategy. So bioproducts are clearly an area with investment and momentum, but where are the opportunities, and how can the sugar industry realise value from the sector? The sugar industry's Sugar Plus roadmap identifies fabrication as one of the key future value-add opportunities for the industry. It describes fabrication for the future as making products like bioplastics that can enable a more sustainable way of life. So bioproducts and bioplastics encompass multiple large markets, which can be difficult to quantify. But let's take the example of bioplastics. So the global market size for bioplastics stands at about $15 billion in 2024, but it's anticipated to reach up to $45 billion by 2029, reflecting a compound annual growth rate of over 24%. Between 2023 and 2028, we expect the global production capacities of bioplastics will almost triple, from over 2 million tonnes in 2023 to nearly 8 million tonnes in 2028. Australia's 2025 national packaging targets call for 100% reusable, recyclable or compostable packaging, 70% of plastic packaging being recycled or composted, and 50% of average recycled content included in packaging by 2025. And this plan is supported by industry and government and supports a complete and systemic change to the way Australia creates, collects and recovers plastics. But there are also other opportunities, for instance, the production of biogas from anaerobic digestion and the production of biochar and biofertilisers. So with that introduction, I'm looking forward to today's discussion. We've got a great panel, and I'll pass back to Maddie to introduce our panellists.
Thanks, Ian. So with this as the starting point for today's discussion, I'd like to introduce the panelists that we have for the webinar today. So we have an excellent group of experts who will share with us their perspectives on the bioproduct and biopolymer opportunity right now in Australia, particularly looking at the role the sugar industry can play in this. So the format for the panel will be that each panelist will have 5 to 7 minutes for some introductory comments, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So please feel free to submit a question at any point during today's webinar using the Q&A feature on your Zoom. So I'll now introduce each of the speakers in turn, and then we'll move through them as they introduce themselves. So our first panelist today is Dan Galligan, the CEO of Queensland Cane Growers Organisation. Originally from a mixed farming expertise near Pittsworth on the Darling Downs, Dan has spent a career across a broad ambit of roles in the agricultural sector. He has led the Queensland Farmers Federation from 2009 to 2015, and prior to that, he spent a decade driving policy and grower services within the Cotton Australia in Queensland. During this time, he worked in advocacy roles in Queensland and New South Wales, as well as holding grower services and management positions. Our second panelist today is Professor Bronwyn Laycock. Bronwyn is a professor at the University of Queensland within the School of Chemical Engineering and the Deputy Director of the ARC Training Centre in Bioplastics and Biocomposites. Bronwyn has a diverse background in translational research, not only working in academia, but also in industry as a consulting chemist, as well as at CSIRO. She is currently working across a range of projects with a focus on materials for circular economy applications and management of the transition to a new plastics economy. Our third panelist today is Don Coyne. Don is the CEO of Australia New Zealand Biochar Industry Group and owner and operator of Bio Biochar. Don is a qualified horticulturist with over 25 years experience in the industry, and he is also a qualified vocational trainer, frontline and small business manager. He has also worked previously with the New South Wales DPI soils team as a technical assistant on biochar field trials. In this previous role, he was the first public officer and president for the Australia New Zealand Biochar Initiative from 2017 to 2020. Our fourth and final panelist today is Professor Bernadette McCabe. Bernadette is the director of the University of Southern Queensland's Centre for Agricultural Engineering. and is the research program team leader for energy and bioresource recycling. Bernadette has a background in agricultural and industrial bioengineering and has over 25 years experience as an academic and researcher. Her research investigates technologies to enable intensive Australian farming and food processing industries to turn their commercial waste into a valuable commodity. Her research has been applied to livestock and cropping sectors, both on and off the farm, and water utilities. So I'll now pass over to Dan to introduce himself.
Thanks, Maddie, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. And I appreciate everyone's time today for the webinar. It's a really interesting discussion. By way of brief background, Cane Growers is an industry organisation. We represent the growing side of the sugar industry in Australia. We are also a national organisation. We have about 70% of the growers in Queensland are members of Cane Growers. We solely focused on looking at industry issues, but from a grower's perspective. We'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Maddie. In relation to diversification in the industry, the Cane Growers Board many years ago decided we needed to make sure to see the opportunities become a reality, that the industry really positioned itself in the middle of understanding what can happen here. So we've had 4 key strategies from a cane growers perspective. The first was around Sugar Plus, and I'll touch on what Sugar Plus is about, and Professor Ahara has already mentioned it. But the second and third one are just as important. We want to see the industry diversified, but building on the strengths we already have. The sugar industry in Australia is actually very successful internationally. We're the 3rd largest exporter of raw sugar in the world. So we do a lot in trade strategy at Cane Growers, and we've done a lot on environmental sustainability, and both these continue to be assets for us when we look in the diversification space. But equally important, if we're going to see the opportunities sort of extend in the industry, we need to build on the strengths at the farm sector. There's lots of things we're doing on the farm scale to help farmers understand their cost of production, so that when it comes to any sort of local opportunity, they can understand how they'll gain a greater bottom line outcome for themselves, I suppose. And finally, I will spend a few slides just talking about what we've been doing at Cane Growers to analyse what the opportunities for the whole industry would be. Thanks, Maddie. So in relation to Sugar Plus, the industry came together in 2021, 2022, just on the back end of COVID, and these organisations collaborated really successfully to develop a strategy around the diversification in the industry. Many people participating might know that the industry's looked at diversification for many years. We've had a few cracks at this, as I would say. We felt like the industry itself needed to develop a strategic document that tried to look at how we can participate more actively in diversification. Next slide. Thanks, Maddie. And Sugar Plus really was a strategic framework. We don't invest as a growing sector, as a membership organisation. We don't invest in diversification opportunities, but we want to provide an avenue from which government can look at the industry as effectively being open for business. And that analysis really proved in the first instance that whatever else is going to happen in diversification, we want to see something ideally that's complementary to the existing sugar supply chain, but also whatever it is, it's going to require feedstock. And every one of our options that we analysed required a divergent of feedstock or an increase in land area for cane production. Thanks, Maddie. So Sugar Plus went to the extent of trying to break down the industry and looking at what each sector of the industry needed to do to be open for business, for future investment, or just to expand existing investment. And the framework didn't put a deadline on this, and it's been amazing to see what's changed since we developed the strategy in 21-22 in terms of the engagement of government and investors, particularly, I'd say, well, not the focus of today, but particularly in the sustainable aviation fuel space. So the advancements over the last 4 years really, I guess, put urgency in our work around Sugar Plus. Next slide, thanks. And importantly, we broke down not just the strategic objectives, but in terms of performance measures for the industry. And the reason I raised these 6 key performance measures is because actually these are, from the industry perspective, the types of things that need to be done to support a advancing and viable sugarcane and sugar producing sector, not just anything in terms of diversification, but they are existing industry issues. And what we're trying to do from a farming perspective is look at the development and diversification of the industry, but through the prism of what it means for farmers and what's in their control and what we can do with existing collaboration across our industry supply chain. And a few of those themes I'll come back to. Next, thanks. So on just 2 key measures on sustainability, and straight away to the next slide, Maddie, there's been an enormous, a lot of effort in the industry on our sustainability credentials, which we're hoping will be a leverage point for diversification. Over 10 years, we've taken the industry from being under significant pressure on environmental standards to actually now being on the front foot where, as an industry organisation, Cane Growers is establishing our own emissions targets. We're establishing our own water quality targets for the protection of the water quality of the Great Barrier Reef. And we've seen market pressure in terms of ESG reporting, particularly into trade for sustainably sourced sugar into the UK over the last 2 years. So we have a Smart Cane BMP program that the industry developed. It's based on Sugar Research Australia's work. And next slide. And over that timeframe of that pathway of sustainability, we've seen enormous effort by farmers to adopt Smart Cane BMP. So we now have 43% of sugarcane production in Australia is accredited to the Smart Cane BMP program. And it's that program now that banks, general financiers, marketers, and the supply chain and buyers of raw sugar are using to demonstrate sustainability. And I guess we raise this because we also see this coming for bioplastics, biopolymers, and sustainable aviation fuel producers are all looking for certified sustainable feedstock. And we've made sure that BMP actually, where we have a player or a collaborator, we can make sure that it meets those standards. Thanks, Maddie. Under Sugar Plus, we went through the next phase of analysis. Thank you. The next one. By looking at all the options in the industry, and we'll skip through these 2 slides pretty quick, but we engaged Pottinger, which is a consultancy firm, to analyse our options, both in terms of developing right through from biofuels, SAF and biodiesel through to alternative proteins. And the next one ranked all those options about what needs to be done in terms of, from the industry's perspective, from the sugarcane industry's perspective in terms of feedstock, but also in terms of a policy analysis and how we could actually collaborate around policy options. And the next slide, thanks, Maddie. So we've gone from analysing the potential of the industry to contribute to new and emerging industries in the bioeconomy to also what we would need to do, but also what we can do, leaning back on cane growers' sort of core skills around advocacy. What are the policy frameworks that need to be discussed? And next slide. And we've analysed that through another report about what's happening around the world. And this is just a very small snapshot. It's not an exhaustive list of the policies being adopted around the world. Cane Growers also does a lot through our international relationships with other ag sectors to look at where we sit in Australia versus the sort of supporting policies we're seeing globally, because just as sugar is a very competitive environment, so are all the other industries that we might diversify into. So we've taken that to establish a policy framework that we're looking to collaborate with. And my final slide, thanks, Maddie, is the one after this. So I guess in summary, from a cane grower's perspective, and the next one, is that we are looking for opportunities to leverage our strengths. Everything we see in diversification from the feedstock provision perspective is going to need to consider emissions reductions. The whole transition, I guess it's different, as we would say to farmers now. In every farmer meeting, there's a degree of skepticism about whether or not these industries are going to take off. But commitments around net zero have really changed the dynamic enormously. And we think that certainly sugarcane is a huge opportunity, and the diversification for the industry could be a great potential for Queensland. We want to see that potential, though, exhibited conscious of what we're doing currently in the community. So we have a really successful sugar industry supply chain, and a lot of communities rely on that. So we want to manage the transition to other industries. And we also want to see diversification. So we're not just switching from sugar to sustainable aviation fuel, but also into other sorts of things that we'll talk about later in the webinar. And finally, I guess one of the benefits of these sorts of discussions today is we want to emphasise the point that the industry is ready for business. We want to see the growers really engaged in the discussion. We want to be part of the coordination with researchers. It's one of the reasons why Cane Growers has taken the step to join Bioenergy Australia and really be a strong participant in the biofuel space. And we're really interested to work with other developers in the industry who want to see what we're doing on farm and see how that'll fit into their business. Thanks for the introduction, Maddie, and I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Dan. That was a great overview of what's happening with the industry and cane growers at the moment. So I'll now pass over to Bronwyn.
Thanks, Maddie, and thanks for the invitation to talk. So I'm coming from the new ARC Training Centre for Bioplastics and Biocomposites, which is a large investment from the federal government and co-investment from industry in exploring the potential for bioplastics and biocomposites. So the partners that we have involved in the centre are listed here, and you'll notice that we have the Queensland Government on board, which is relevant for what I'll be talking about shortly. Next slide, please. So the centre is a $13 million centre, including $7 million in cash contribution. We actually have 19 new PhD projects spanning 4 research themes and 4 postdoctoral researchers within the centre. And the concept for this centre is to drive advancements in technology for bioplastics and biocomposite products. We're headquartered here at the School of Chemical Engineering in Brisbane, and we're collaborating strongly with QUT, and we are seeking to be a world-leading hub in research in this space. So our centre is very transdisciplinary. We do work across engineering, polymer chemistry, environmental science, social policy, and so on. So the particular theme of relevance for this meeting is the bioresource transformation theme and the bioplastic manufacture theme, as well as the novel products and application space. So those 3 are all areas which are very strongly focused on the kinds of initiatives around biopolymers related to sugar that are of relevance. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So the bioplastics and biocomposites research at UQ is very long established, at least 15 years of work. And we've been traditionally working across every aspect from synthesis to end of life. So focusing on PHA, which is the biopolymer, the bacterial biopolymer that's already been referred to quite a lot, through to modification, and then a lot of work on composites. So actually, we have work in advanced controlled release fertilizers, so trying to match plant demand from controlled release aspects. We have biopolymer composites. So we have looked in the past at wood as well as bagasse type applications. And then we also look at biodegradation performance and process demonstration and larger scale demonstration of composites and, for application in packaging and other areas. So if we go to the next slide, please. One of the things I particularly wanted to focus on is a project that we're currently coming to the end of with the Queensland Government, which was scoping for a pilot plant design on sugar to PHA. So this PHA, polyhydroxyalkanoate, is the biodegradable biopolymer that is bacterially derived. And this concept of a pilot plant has been based on earlier detailed techno-economic analysis that we've conducted here at UQ. And we've scaled it up to the point where we're looking at a 1 tonne per annum demonstration plant to test out the concepts that we've developed through the centre in terms of PHA production. This process will be using native halophiles, so extremophiles, bacteria that grow under extreme conditions, which has been demonstrated internationally. And so this plant would be based in the Queensland area, probably southeast Queensland, with the objective of having enough PHA for testing for demonstration and product development. In addition, we have within the centre some parallel projects where we're doing demonstration commercial product testing and development of composites for applications that we can take to the field to sort of test the production and commercialisation of these kinds of products in parallel. So I guess what I wanted to really highlight was that this centre gives us the opportunity to explore a range of products of application to sugar growers. So we are talking the biopolymers, which have already been highlighted. We're talking composites, which are applications for the products that have been developed. And we're also talking controlled release applications for pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, and so on, where we also have facilities in-house that have been developed that allow us to do quite advanced technology development, including spray coating and formulation development. So the centre offers quite a range of opportunities for novel materials development of relevance to the centre, including the ability to do life cycle assessment as well as techno-economics. So last slide, please. So if anyone is interested in any further information about the work of the centre, We have the centre website here, so all the details are available to you. So thank you.
Thanks, Bronwyn. And we'll now pass on to Don.
Thank you, Maddie, and thank you to SRA and QUT for inviting me here today to share about the benefits of biochar in the sugar industry. ANZ Biochar Industry Group, or ANZBIG, is the peak body for biochar in Australia, and we are really about the commercialisation of all the R&D that has gone on since biochar's discovery in the Terra Preta, which is Portuguese for dark earth anthropic soils in the Amazon. We are an emerging industry. We've got 200 plus members, of which 20 members are involved in multi-million-dollar projects now worldwide. We have produced the world's first biochar industry roadmap, and we are currently rolling it out nationally with the Tasmanian Biochar Forum coming up next week in Launceston. Next slide, please, Maddie. So, what is biochar and why a roadmap? I just haven't got time to play this video today, but just wanted to point it to you as a good resource. It gives an overview of the current state of the industry and what the value opportunity is by 2030. We've identified that there is currently between 50 to 100 million tonnes of residual biomass that's being burnt or landfilled that could be in Australia each year, and that could be formed into bioenergy, renewable fuel, biochar, and wood vinegar. And the video includes a quote from our patron Ross Garno, who is a champion for the biochar industry scale up in Australia. Next slide, please, Maddie. Also, please refer to our free resources page for a download of an introduction to biochar fact sheet. We have defined biochar as carbon stored in a durable form for centuries to millennia in soil and non-soil applications, as opposed to biocarbon or metallurgic charcoal, which is burnt. In this instance, that will replace fossil-based reductants and fuels, which is an abatement outcome. Both biochar and biocarbon is produced by the same technology. Next slide, please. In our roadmap, we have 3 infographics which outline all the applications and markets for biochar and biocarbon. So, in order of what ANZBIG has determined as higher order use, we start with biochar for soil application and markets. So compost to soil carbon projects, to golf courses, remediation and erosion control, animal feeds and bio-based fertilizers. And just wanted to acknowledge the source of these infographics are from Catalyst Environmental Management, with support from Southeast Water. And you can see there that we have coined the phrase, chars ain't chars. So biochars are tailored to be fit for purpose. Next slide, please. Then we go to non-soil uses of biochar and biocarbons. Often the biocarbons are more suited to feedstocks that might have impurities. Markets include relevant to the sugar industry, particularly filtration, so water and air, and reactive barriers for on-site water management, discharge and diffuse runoff from agricultural fields into waterways that contain nitrate, for instance, which can be adsorbed onto chars. This could be highly beneficial in the Great Barrier Reef catchment regions, for instance. Also, stabilisation and dust suppression, a big one in the mining sector. Biocomposites, bioplastics and biopolymers, which we're talking about today. They can be 3D printed as well. soil remediation, packaging, concrete, and roads. Next slide, please, Maddie. And then we go on to the non-soil uses of biocarbons, which range from domestic heating, barbecues, aluminium, steel, copper, and silicon smelting, as well as bioenergy fuel for electricity generation. Next slide, please, Maddie. So today, focusing in on the biocomposites or bioplastics, bioplastics, biopolymers. Next slide, Maddie. So I've just picked out the highlights from ANZBIG's conferences since 2017. So this one here, CHARs in construction, composites and additive manufacturing, concepts and considerations by John McDonald Warry at the University of Waikato, is an excellent read. And the pictures show 3D printed polylactic acid resin-based filaments, contain 30% pine biochar by weight, so residual and underutilised biomass or trash from pine forests that are normally burnt in fields. So we can relate that to the sugar industry, which also does occur. Next slide, please, Maddie. And the Politecnico di Torino University in Italy is one of the leading research institutions in the field of biochar and biocomposites. We hosted Mauro Gioaccelli at ANZ BC 19 at RMIT University. And this presentation highlighted the global composites market size, which is expected to reach US $131 billion by 2024, according to a Grand View research report. And some of the main industries in that market are automotive, sports and construction. It also highlights composite market traditional carbon fillers, which include carbon black and carbon fibers. Next slide, please, Maddie. Made of Air in Germany is by far the biggest example of bioplastics using biochar that we're aware of. And one of their advisors is an ex-CFO of Google. To quote their website, by 2060, adding just 10% biochar to global plastics would remove 3.3 gigaton of CO2 equivalent per year. Mercedes is also partnering with US companies by turning CO2 into bioplastics, for example, polycarbonates. And this is another future possibility for syngas coming off biochar technology. They sink CO2 from the syngas and it further enhances biochar bioenergy systems. Also, we must make note that the bioplastics can return for pyrolysis for circularity. So that is, the actual bioplastics become a feedstock in themselves. So next slide, please, Maddie. I have created a shared folder on this link in the slide where you can view and download some of those highlights from ANZBIG events, including our recent forums. And that, as I mentioned, is part of our national rollout for the 2030 roadmap. So thank you again for your attention today, and back over to you, Maddie.
Thanks, Don. We'll now pass over to Bernadette.
Thank you, Maddie, and welcome everybody. Thank you to SRA and QUT for the opportunity to present today. Today's topic for me is around food, fuels and fertilisers, but particularly focusing on the fuel and fertiliser aspect. Next slide, please, Maddie. So SugarPass has been highlighted a number of times already at the webinar, so I won't take too much time on this. But just to say that, you know, the importance of inserting the biofertiliser component, which is a little bit missing there, and particularly around enhanced efficiency biochar-based fertilisers, which Don did a great job of giving an overview there. Next slide, please, Maddie. I wanted to start with highlighting the materials for which we'll look at, particularly around the bioconversion processes. So here we've got the feedstocks that are coming out of the sugar industry at the moment for Australia-wide fresh mass production. We've got the gas at 9 million tonne, trash 6, molasses at 1 million, mill mud at 1.5, juice/raw sugar at about 4, and a vinasse is estimated at 7.5 million tonnes. So you can see that there is a lot of ability to convert these waste products into usable or other bioproducts. Next slide, please, Maddie. The important component of understanding what's the best fit for those feedstocks, of course, is the technology pathway. And there are 5 that we can consider, all at various levels and all of which use different types of feedstocks. Black soldier fly larvae have been looked at, as is anaerobic digestion, second generation ethanol, gasification, such pyrolysis, and hydrothermal liquefaction. And I'll just go through those very briefly before I focus particularly on AD. Next slide, please, Maddie. So with the BSFL, we will look at, I'll just move my panel screen there. In terms of the feedstocks, we've got, oops, sorry, I'll just get back to the slides. Move that. Right, so the feedstock here with most suitable is molasses, and from an undigested feedstock with production of frass, which then can produce antifungals. If we look at the larvae, it's a very protein-rich feed, which can be used. Then with the frass, it's more than antifungals, of course, we can get chitin fertilizer, AD, and also thermal processing. Next slide, please. With the hydrothermal liquefaction and pyrolysis, depending on whether we're going to use the feedstock, which is the gas and trash, in this case, wet and dry under, if it's wet, it's the HTL, would give various pathways of off gases, and the biocrude and the biochar, which provides all of those other end products. And pyrolysis is the only difference is that it'd be anaerobic under different atmospheres and temperatures. Next slide, please. And on to gasification, which is an area which we're also looking at in terms of biochar work at the Centre for Agriculture Engineering. The feedstock can be gas or trash, and under those conditions of gasification at a substoichiometrically oxygenated condition, the off gases can go on to energy and further refining into syngas, and of course the biochar component into fertilizers and many, many other uses, of course. Next slide, please. 2G ethanol, feedstocks we're looking at is quite range from all of those feedstocks on the right-hand side except for vinasse. And with the treatment or pre-treatments of enzymatic or acidic going into separation, we then go into fermentation, and with the addition of yeast, we can have animal feed, but then through fermentation to produce ethanol and therefore fuel, the biofuels, which have been spoken about. And then it can also produce lignin, which is has a host of other end uses such as energy, adhesive, polymers, coatings, emulsifiers, etc. Next slide, please. So going on to anaerobic digestion, which is a key area for which we do research here at Centre for Agriculture Engineering at UniSQ. It has multiple uses. I always refer to biogas as the Swiss Army knife of bioenergy and also renewables. As you can see on the right-hand side, the feedstocks are very varied from bagasse, trash, molasses, mill mud, juice, raw sugar, and vinasse. And the anaerobic digestion obviously will produce fuel through biogas, but also importantly digestate. The biogas can either be used as a vehicle fuel or directly combusted electricity, or through further upgrading to produce biomethane for a direct injection into the grid, although we're only really at demonstration phase here in Australia. When it's upgraded to biomethane, we can also use the carbon dioxide particularly if it's food grade in the food and beverage industry. The digestate can be used as a liquid fertilizer or even dried down to be then pelletized and used in different forms, such as organomineral forms. So now with the next slide, I just wanted to focus more into the AD and where we at CAE have got our focus is around the actual energy aspect, that is through the materials characterization, through techno-economic feasibilities, the optimization of the process itself, and then also the integration within a farming system. And then importantly, to valorize the feedstocks in that process, it's important to understand the fertilizer value. So we're looking here at material characterization, novel formulations, which include synthetic fertilizers, so as I was referring to before, the organomineral fertilizers. And we're also looking into granulations and also performance, which then goes on to the last bit around crop response and fertilizer amendments. So we have glasshouses and field trials here on site where we look at agronomic impacts and also soil health. And this forms a great circular economy in and of itself. And this diagram on the left-hand side is a great example of where anaerobic digestion becomes a central component on farm. It's taken from a publication that was done that I co-authored with my IEA Bioenergy Task 37 colleagues back in 2020, which looked at how anaerobic digestion is integrated into farming systems in various countries, including Australia, Canada, Italy, and the UK. This one here is a model which the Italians call biogas done right. And whilst it's actually sort of just very much on mixed cropping system here, where we've got animals producing manure, which is then fed into the anaerobic digesters, producing electricity and also upgraded to the grid. The digester is also used on farm on the crops for not only the principal crop, but also a double cropping, which then completes the cycle for feed for animals and also food for human consumption. Next slide, please. So just to then drill down even further deeper into some work that we did some years ago, back in 2019, this was some novel work involving ensiling fermentation on sugarcane biomass. This is a part of a 2-year funded project by the Australian-Germany Joint Research Cooperation Scheme. And basically the whole project looked at the reuse of agricultural residues from other organic residues from for energy production biogas and also nutrient recovery from AD. And the program of work was developed in conjunction with the German Biomass Research Centre, DBFZ, which is located in Leipzig in Saxony in Germany, which have good complementarity with our skills here at UniSQ. Next slide, please. So basically the work looked at the assessment of, first of all, some site-specific data in terms of the production amounts and seasonality of residues, current utilisation, the energy demand and prices and costs. But the particular focus in terms of a technical component was looking at using ensiling of sugarcane trash for improved storage, where we're looking at different additives and also the effects of biogas potential, with an overall aim of developing a concept/scenario for an on-site biogas production. Now, if we look at that diagram there on the right-hand side, there's various phases of what happens during the ensiling process, starting through at an aerobic phase where oxygen levels are high, then going on to a lag phase where we have quickly declining oxygen. As the microbes start to increase in numbers, the pH decreases, and we then also have oxygen levels rising again, at which point we have the fermentation phase, and then the pH then dramatically decreases on as we then have stabilization. The two aims of ensiling are to firstly preserve through the production of organic acids such as acetic acid and lactic acid, and also to form of chemical. It is a form of chemical pretreatment in that it increases hydrolysis of cellulosics and also the hemicelluloses that are found in trash. So we essentially were looking at the main experimental plan was looking at ensiling sugarcane trash using two strategies. First of all, the addition of molasses to increase the concentration of sugars, and secondly, the combination of molasses with a commercial inoculant to increase the lactic acid and therefore increase preservation. So it was tested on sugarcane trash and also sugarcane stalked to assess alternative use of sugarcane as a crop, energy crop. So just very quickly, I can just go to conclusions given the time. What we found with the sugarcane, without silage, it is proved to be suitable biomass for ensiling. So a high concentration of degradable sugars were converted to VFA, volatile fatty acids, and lactic acid. So the pH decreased down to 3.5 after 70 days. And it also resulted in a solubilization of the fibrous fraction, which increased the methane yield by 17%. The improvements on the trash was quite pronounced after 70 days of incubation. The biochemical methane potential testing showed that the use of molasses alone did not provide enough benefits to justify the use, but when we combined molasses and the commercial inoculant, it increased methane potential by a big 79%. So I'll leave those numbers there for you, a bit of food for thought, and I thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Bernadette. So we're now going to move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. So just a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time using the question feature. So I'll have Ian start us off with some questions first.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. And so my first question is to Dan. So Dan, we've been talking about bioproducts for quite some time, and we've obviously got roadmaps and Sugar Plus strategies. But what do we really need to do? What are the critical actions you think we as a sector, as an industry, need to take over the next sort of, couple of years to really drive it forward?
Yeah, I think, well, you're dead right. And we've even heard today, this just the amount of potential in the industry is just enormous. And we've seen that around the world. So I usually sort of lean on the experience I've seen in other countries where these things have taken off. I think why I focused on the fact that I think as an industry, we want to see greater collaboration both with the existing industry players and with proponents to make sure we get a good policy framework around some of the development here. I do think that there's enormous potential, particularly around emissions reduction requirements from government, that if we have a concise policy ask from government with both proponents and the existing industry players, then we might see a bit more of a nudge effort for something that's commercial reality. And I guess the reality is that's what we're actually seeing most dominating the SAF space. And one of the things in the sorts of innovations we're talking about today is there's a risk that we're just switching from sugar to SAF in some areas particularly, and we don't think that's really necessarily seeing the full potential of the crop. I think that's a great thing, but it's still not seeing the full potential of the crop. So greater collaboration in is probably the first thing I'd say, and that I guess the point I'm trying to make is that's why cane growers is willing to sort of stretch ourselves into a space. It's not really our specialty. We're not the scientists in this space, and we spend a lot of time now talking to investors, scientists, and proponents. So we just need to build our expertise and really share that knowledge back onto the farm, because there needs to be belief in the farm sector. Confidence in agriculture is a huge dominant force, and unless we can position ourselves to speak with credibility to the farmers almost as individuals, they're going to lose confidence in some of these industries. So we need to be able to share that knowledge back onto the farm, because otherwise the feedstock won't be there.
No, great comments. And I think it's also important for us all to recognise that other industries, competitor industries overseas are moving strongly as well. So, we need to get our policy settings right and our collaboration right to also ensure some of these opportunities accrue here in Australia as well. So maybe Bronwyn, the challenge with bioplastics has been the economics of production. It just costs more to produce bioplastics than conventional plastics. Where do you think sort of the big opportunities are for us to reduce costs and be more economically competitive against the current materials?
Yeah, so there are a couple of opportunities that we're particularly starting to explore. One is to use some of these wild type bacteria that, like halophiles, that allow much reduced extraction costs, because they can be, you can extract the biopolymer using osmotic shock rather than far more expensive extraction processes. Another aspect is, again, using wild type bacteria allows us to use non-sterile mixed culture conditions, which allows us to have rather significantly reduced cost of production. Then they're never going to be cost competitive with polyolefins, but they will. The prices are coming down rapidly as we go to scale internationally, and there are a lot of demonstrator pilots and large scale manufacturing now internationally, where the prices are already starting to come down as efficiencies of scale and efficiencies of production start to kick in.
Yeah, great. Where do you see sort of production? What sort of feedstock areas do you see really driving forward the bioplastics area in Australia? Where does sugarcane rank against other crops or other waste materials?
Yes, so sugar is actually a really cost competitive feedstock, because it's already very suitable for immediate use and uptake by bacteria. Some of the less refined sugar streams as well are useful, and there's work that's being done internationally on molasses to PHA conversion, for example. So some of the cheaper feedstocks are very, very good. There is actually quite a lot of work on biorefinery potential, so taking biomass, leafy bagasse, woody feedstocks and so on, and also using those through a binary refinery process as feedstock. That's been well demonstrated. So the cheaper the feedstock, to some extent, the cheaper the PHA as well. So looking for waste resources as a feedstock is certainly very much on the radar here and internationally. A lot of work being done in that space. So I guess so long as it's simple enough carbon feedstocks, the bacteria usually can be quite efficient in taking those up.
Yeah, thanks, Bronwyn. So Don, over to you. So you talked about soil uses of biochar, and you also talked about non-soil uses. Do you see that the early markets are going to be soil, and then we'll move over time to non-soil, or do you see that there's maybe some more immediate opportunities in the high value applications of biochar?
Yeah, look, the soil markets are still very immature, and some of the other non-soil markets are more mature. So I do think that, you know, there are definitely some immediate non-soil markets that are there, particularly I think roads and concrete. So, you know, the built environment, the green built environment as well, probably are the biggest ones that we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, do you see? I mean, in terms of the immature soil markets, how do you think the sugar industry can be more involved in helping to create those markets?
Well, look, the sugar industry has the potential to be a significant, market contributor on both sides of the supply and demand equation. So, a feedstock supplier, biochar generator, and a user of biochar, into many soil applications, both directly and through their supply chain. That is, scope 3 sinks is going to become ever more important, particularly in the new financial disclosure reporting requirements as they come in, and the net zero commitments and actions get brought into focus for the ASX listed companies. So
so some of those sustainability carbon pricing benefits might be where which might really help to unlock some of those markets.
For sure. So, I mean, the biochar market is expected to grow significant globally as net zero starts to focus on the net. So that requires carbon removals to counter emissions and ultimately start to reverse climate change, which will be sought more and more as the impacts worsen, as we're all too familiar with. So biochar is one of, if not the cheapest, technological CDR options the IPCC have identified to date, and comes with significant co-benefits for many industries across the economy. So ANZBIG has a users report and new farmers guide on our website, which highlights case studies with significant net user benefits, dollar value, to demonstrate the business case for biochar users. We're seeking sponsorship partners on the farmers guide, which has just been released in draft and expects to be finalised mid-year.
Great, thanks, Don. And a question for Bernadette. So Bernadette, you've talked about the opportunities for biogas, and obviously there are some opportunities for the sugar industry. What do we need to happen to see biogas uptake within the sugar industry directly? Where do you think the early opportunities are, and what's going to make it change?
Yes, so the bit of a brief example that I gave there of a concept, I guess, that we put forward to test trash represents one opportunity. In terms of adoption of AD, for the sugarcane industry, it would be very much early, given that, you know, I know the big challenges and hurdles from an industry point of view, you know, for Australia across the various sectors. But if I were to look at for the sugarcane industry, it would start with the feedstock, and the work that we did on ensiling represents probably an entry level for trash. Now, I'll put it up there because I know it's on everybody's lips. We all know that trash retention is an important in sugarcane production system, and it's encouraged and recognised as industry best practice. Best management practice, BMP. So we understand it provides an organic carbon nutrient and enables moisture retention, etc., etc. So removal of the trash for AD and biogas generation may cause issues in those areas, but of course, because it will impact soil health and water quality. So I'm very aware of that. So we need to be targeting those areas where there'll be high amounts of generations of trash, which I know that there are in certain regions. And it's also important to consider what is the best technology for it. So, you know, trash to biochar, and you know, what's the easy win? It's about understanding at what point can AD be adopted in terms of market maturity. We did this work back in 2019, nearly 5 years ago, and the landscape has changed considerably, you know, since then, which is only sort of pointing toward those. And another reason why we did that work is that there is a precedent in Brazil, where our researcher from Germany actually is from, Leandro Janke. He's done a lot of work in terms of like understanding those challenges. So other challenges, particularly for a feedstock like trash, for AD include, you know, what's the recovery from the fields like? And that does differ according to region, especially in terms of the amount that's generated. We need to look at it in terms of storing to compensate seasonality. That's what we were basically doing by ensiling, because it does overcome those seasonal variations, but how do you store it in between? There's also the actual characterization of the material. So if for trash, it's the lignocellulosic recalcitrant. So it is the inability to break down that highly, well, in some cases, lignin components, because lignin does not degrade under anaerobic digestion. And also another area which isn't even understood properly in Australia from, you know, any other areas which take up biogas, you know, easy, like I'm thinking about piggeries, which we work with, red meat processing plants who do treat their effluent, is that low content of nutrients. So characterizing the feedstock for the nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and also trace elements is very important. We've done some studies around looking at trace elements, even addition for red meat processing and water, and it shows that it's something that's done internationally, but in Australia we don't. So those limitations in terms of NPS and trace elements are important in terms of generating enough biogas. So that's just a few, but of course, the one bit that I haven't talked about, which I think we all know about, is also the policy settings in the sugarcane growing countries, and that could be done actually on a worldwide basis to understand what's happening in other countries like in Thailand and Brazil to actually increase the uptake in Australia, perhaps.
Right. Thanks, Bernadette. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in terms of questions today. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Maddie to wrap up the presentation this morning.
Yeah, so thank you to each of our panelists today. Before everyone signs off, I'd just like quickly, if you could respond to this poll. So this project, this webinar series has been part of a project between QUT and SRA to build an industry network around bioeconomy. And it would be great to have some feedback on what you'd like next. So please put down an idea. You can just vote for one of these ideas, or if you also have something else, you just drop it in the Q&A and I'll be able to see it that way. But it would be, yeah, really great to get some feedback on especially what the sugar industry would like next in this space. Yeah, we've had great attendance at these webinars, so please just take a second to vote there. That'd be great. Thank you. And I'll just wrap up while everyone's voting on this one now. So this concludes the webinar. I'd like to thank Ian O'Hara for acting as co-chair for this event, and Jane Trindle for your co-supervision, and SRA for funding this project. And of course, thank you to all of our panelists today for taking the time to speak to us. And please feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have or many further suggestions. I'll be reaching out to a few of you to try to get a little bit more feedback. No one likes a questionnaire, obviously, but it's just great to help continue building this network in the future bioeconomy space for the sugar industry. So thank you again. As everyone signs off, everyone just keeps voting. Thank you.